Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Halton District School Board's Student Census Information Session. Glad you were able to join us and hope you find this evening to be quite informative about this very important initiative that the board has taken on. But before we begin the evening, we would like to spend a moment to share our HDSB land acknowledgement. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in modern history and traditions. Of many First Nations and the Métis, from the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. My name is Rob Etoff, and I'm one of the superintendents of education for the school board, and I'm going to be helping to moderate the evening. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce the rest of the panel that will be joining us and that you will be hearing from over the course of the next hour or so. Starting with Dr. Jewel Amoa. She is our Human Rights and Equity Advisor. Welcome, Jewel. Also joining us this evening is Mary Marshall. She is our System Principal of Equity and Inclusive Education for the Halton District School Board. Thanks, Mary. And Dr. Rosanna Bashiglia, who is one of our research specialists here at the Halton District School Board, and you are going to be hearing a presentation from her as well. She's also going to be probably taking on a great number of the questions that will need to be answered over the course of the evening. But to begin with, we would like to turn things over for some introductory comments to our Director of Education, Stuart Miller. Stuart?
Thank you, Rob, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, a cold, wintry night. Thank you very much for what we believe to be a very important initiative by our board. There's no question that Ontario has a robust and vibrant public education system, and that public education system has served this province very well, and the Halton District School Board has served the students here very well as well. All indicators over the last 2 decades have shown that we as a public education and we as a board are improving. However, it has not improved for everybody. There continues to be gaps in achievement and other areas in perceptions and how students belong. Even some of those students who have done well academically feel as though they've been excluded or not included in our system. There's no question there's a gap for some of our groups and some of our students. And some of those groups are identified and they are identity groups. We need to do better and we need to know more. And that's what this student census is about. We need to get on the road to ensuring student achievement, well-being, and equity for all students in our board, every single one of them. We know that the impact of identity on educational outcomes is something we need to know more about. And currently, we don't have all that information. There's a gap in the achievement and gap in perception, and there's a gap in our knowledge. And that's what this census is about. It's about helping us to identify those gaps and then work to address them and improve them. Identity is often a common factor in determining who's successful and who's unsuccessful. And we need to engage in the learning about identity so we can close that gap and indeed end that gap. So this census is about collecting and analyzing identity-based data and perceptual data, which will enable our school and our system leaders, and in particular, our principals, vice principals, and teachers to more precisely identify and address the barriers to student success. I think we can all agree the purpose of public education is to support, facilitate, and help every single student in this system to be the best they can be and to achieve their dreams and go on to the vocations and careers that they want to achieve. And it's our responsibility to help every single one of them. But as I said at the beginning, there's a gap in our knowledge, and we know that we are leaving some students behind, and in particular, some of those identity groups are being left behind. So this data will assist us in better understanding the needs of our students. It will help us to plan programs to meet identified student needs. It will reduce disadvantages faced by some students with the goal of eliminating disadvantages faced by some students. It will also help us determine where we can allocate funds. We can see those gaps and put more funds, more resources, more staff, or different staff into those areas where those gaps exist. And it will help us improve equitable programs. This data will help us create a better picture of our students, their success, or their lack of success, their perceptions on whether they feel as though they belong or whether they feel as though they don't belong, whether they feel included or whether they feel excluded. That is the purpose of this census. It is important work, and it's a work being done across educational and public institutions across North America, and it is much needed. So I thank you very much for joining us this evening to learn more about this process, why we're doing this process, and most importantly, the significance of this process, and for supporting the Halton District School Board. Thank you very much. Rob?
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for sharing the why, right? Because this is exactly why this initiative is incredibly important to us, and why we're looking for full participation from each and every one of our students across the system. Tonight's a presentation is going to take the format of a variety of different scenarios. We have some visuals to share with you, some videos, and we also have a live question and answer session. So we have information that's been shared with us over the last week or so since we put our call out for questions. So we have some of those questions lined up. And over the course of the evening, we continue to encourage you to send in submitting your questions through the form that's linked in the HDSB website and pinned at the top of the HDSB Facebook and Twitter pages. We will hope to get to most, if not all, of the questions during the presentation. But for those that are not answered during the presentation, we look to follow up with an answer afterwards, and we'll ensure that that gets out to our communities. Before we hear from our Human Rights and Equity Advisor with respect to how human rights is centered in this particular initiative, we wanted to share a bit of a promotional video with you that we will look to share throughout the system in the coming days.
Ontario is one of the most diverse places in the world. At the Halton District School Board, we recognize that our diversity makes our society stronger and richer. We also recognize that for students to be successful, we must ensure they feel accepted and included, are confident in who they are as individuals, and experience teaching and learning environments that are responsive to and reflective of their needs.
Ontario's education system have been recognized internationally as one of the best. Ontario's indicators of student success have improved over the past 2 decades. However, these improvements have not provided equitable access to opportunities and outcomes for all students. Achievement gaps continue to exist across identity groups, and even academically successful students do not always feel included in their school community.
The Halton District School Board, along with other school boards and the Ministry of Education, are re-examining how we can better support all of our students, and in particular, Indigenous, Black, and racialized youth. All public sector organizations in Ontario, including school boards, are required to conduct a census of their key stakeholder populations. The HDSB will be launching the Student Census in January 2021.
The Student Census will ask students in grades 4 to 12 to report on various aspects of their identity, including gender identity, ethnicity, indigeneity, language, race, religion, disability, and for older students, sexual orientation. Students will also be asked about their feelings of belonging, inclusion, and safety.
For students in kindergarten to grade 3, and for those where special education needs to meet a certain criteria, a parent or guardian will complete the student census on behalf of the child.
The student census will be completed by grade 4 to 12 students electronically during the school day. The data is completely confidential and will be kept private. Results will be reported in group format, so no student's identity and response is ever disclosed.
The data collected through the student census will enable the HDSB to have a broader and more in-depth understanding of the students and families we serve in order that we can more effectively identify and remove systemic barriers to ensure equitable access to opportunities and outcomes for all students. The urgency of this work continues to grow, and it is clear that as a society, further action is required. We are ready. Please join us.
Thanks very much. And we will be rolling that video out in order to create really important awareness for communities that the student census is coming in the new year, and that we very much need each and every one of our students engaged and involved. But before we begin and learn more about the census itself, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Jewel Amoa. Jewel?
Thank you very much, Rob. Good evening, everyone. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the human rights rationale for conducting the census. Really, I wanted to expand upon some of the earlier comments by Director Stuart Miller. So the initiative to collect identity-based data is a means of gathering stories of identity and understanding across the board. So really to get a sense of who our students are, what communities they belong to, and what stories those communities bring to the school experience. This understanding will raise awareness of a range of identities and intersections of identities that comprise the Halton District School Board and will facilitate our understanding of the different communities and our shared commonalities. Because although we represent different communities, we might have different individual identities, we might have different points of intersection of those identities. We each represent a race, an ancestry, a gender identity, a level of ability, a religion, etc. And so all those things intersect or come together to comprise who we are individually and who we are within our communities. And so the data will help us understand all of those, as well as the commonalities. So things that we have in common, whether those be our individual identities or points at which we might intersect. Not only does human rights legislation support the collection of self-identification data, but the creation of a truly inclusive and supportive human rights environment for all requires this data collection, its analysis, and the development of programs and supports that are a direct response to this data. So the data is essentially almost the beginning of things for us. So once we have information, this information is going to help inform how we move forward as a board to better respond to what the analysis has told us about gaps in representation and how we can best support students in their learning environments. If we are committed to equitable practices, then these must be based on data that highlights gaps in representation and in understanding. The data tells us not only who we are as individuals, whether this be, as I indicated before, our religion, our level of physical or cognitive ability, sexual orientation, race, ancestry, gender identity, etc., but also provides insights into our rich and diverse composition of a Halton District School Board community. It is completely appropriate to collect self-identification data, both on grounds listed in the Human Rights Code, as well as grounds that are not in the code. For example, level of education of parents within the household, or the occupation of parents within the household. So it's appropriate to collect this data as long as any data collected is done so in a way that follows accepted data collection techniques, privacy regulations, and other applicable legislation, and that the data is collected for a purpose that is consistent with the code. Examples of code-consistent purposes could be to monitor and evaluate potential discrimination, identify and remove systemic barriers, to lessen or prevent disadvantage or comparative disadvantage between identities or between groups within the context of education, or to promote substantive equality for people identified by code grounds. And further details of these code grounds, as well as the guidelines, appear in the document that's reflected in this image here. And it's a document prepared by the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which is really guidelines for collecting identity-based data. And so as long as the collection of data is within the context of those guidelines, as well as in what is provided for by the Anti-Racism Secretariat Directorate in terms of the anti-racism guidelines, and I think Dr. Bichelier will speak a bit more about those in her presentation. As long as the data follows those purposes outlined there, then it's entirely legitimate, in fact, quite helpful to do so. The Halton District School Board Student Census Initiative is comprised of both qualitative data and quantitative data. So quantitative in terms of the actual numbers of students reflecting the various identity grounds, as well as qualitative data in terms of perceptual experience in school environment. And you heard in the earlier video that what this speaks to is perhaps the level of safety or inclusion that students feel. And sometimes that level of safety or inclusion is directly tied to their sense of individual identity or community identity and belonging. The combination of qualitative and quantitative data will not only provide insight into the range of identities reflected by Halton District School Board students, but also connecting perceptions of the experience of school to various identity categories. Data collection and analysis will facilitate an inclusive and human rights-centered environment across all Halton District School Board schools. Thank you.
Thanks, Jewel. We're now going to hear from Dr. Rosanna Bichelier, and she's going to walk us through the various different components, and I think in doing so is probably going to answer most of the questions that our students and our communities may have. So I will now turn it over to our research department.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Rosanna Bichelier. I am pleased that you were able to join us this evening to learn about the upcoming HDSB student census. I'm a research specialist with the board's research department. The student census represents a call to action for all school boards in Ontario. It is a result of growing recognition that racism, prejudice, and discrimination continue to negatively impact specific communities. In 2016, the Ontario government formed the Anti-Racism Directorate. The Directorate leads the government's anti-racism initiatives to build a more inclusive society and works to identify, address, and prevent systemic racism in government, policy, legislation, programs, and services. In 2017, the Directorate held public community meetings across the province to gather stakeholders' perspectives and recommendations for fighting systemic racism. The public requested that the province take 3 specific actions. 1, to develop anti-racism legislation to ensure longevity and sustainability of anti-racism work within the government. 2, to mandate race-based data collection and public reporting across all public sector organizations in education, child welfare, health, and justice sectors. And 3, the need for government to take action to address systemic racism in all public sectors. As a result of these recommendations, a number of provincial and ministry strategic plans were developed and released. For example, the Equity Strategy Action Plan that all school boards are accountable to. The Anti-Racism Act was also published in 2017. For Canada, this has been described as a historic legislature, strengthening the government's commitment to equity and protecting the rights of racialized and Indigenous communities. The Anti-Racism Act requires that public sector organizations gather race-based and other identity-based data using standards which were published in 2018. The data standards ensure consistencies in the ways in which questions are asked across public sectors, which will allow for comparisons across and within sectors. By 2023, public sector organizations are required to report to their respective ministries on the census population profiles and provide measures of differential opportunities and outcomes in order to identify, dismantle systemic barriers. In the Halton District School Board, the student census will include all students from kindergarten to grade 12. For students in K-3, due to the young age of the student, parents and/or guardians will complete the questionnaire on behalf of the child. For students in grade 4 to 12, they will complete the census on their own, but provide assistance and modifications if needed. So for students with special education needs and students with English language learning needs, there will be supports available. The census is voluntary, and parents and guardians can opt out of the process. The census is also private, confidential, but not anonymous. It will be administered electronically through individualized links that are tied to student ID. This will enable us to retroactively and proactively describe students' experiences. Schools will then receive an in-depth profile of their student population, which will support them to develop goals that are meaningful for their student population. The data standard referenced in the Anti-Racism Act provide guidelines and specific ways the questions need to be asked across the province. We do not have flexibility in how these questions are phrased. The questions will include Indigenous identity, ethnic origin, race, religion, sex, citizenship, immigration status, gender identity, sexual orientation for older students, languages, and disabilities. Terms that students may not understand are defined, and the definitions are accessible to the respondent with a scroll or mouse over. Educators are also welcome to introduce terminology to the class ahead of time. All questions are voluntary, and respondents can choose to skip any question they do not want to answer. Most questions also have a do not know or uncertain response option, and the opportunity to enter a response that may not be present in the list of response options. The student census also includes questions on parents and guardians, for example, education level, employment status, occupation, and family type. In addition to questions regarding student identity, the census also includes questions regarding relationships with peers and adults at school, students' well-being, such as sleep, activity, and social media use, extracurricular activities, so the types and the frequency, and belonging and diversity. So acceptance, feeling represented in their curriculum, and being able to learn about others. These are similar to previous surveys about school experiences that students complete on a regular basis. The board has been planning for the census for the past year and a half. An interdisciplinary committee has been meeting regularly, planning for the implementation of the census and developing resources. Under the data standards, we're expected to engage in a number of phases. The awareness phase includes increasing awareness among internal and external stakeholders, including staff, parents and guardians, and community partners. This is the phase that we're in right now. In January, we will initiate the consent phase. This includes sending out information to families and providing an opportunity to opt out of the census. Expect to receive a school messenger notification early in January with instruction on how to opt your child out of the data collection if you so wish. The process will be similar to the change of delivery model. Following the consent phase, toward the end of January, we will begin collecting using a standard or a staggered approach across schools. We will be collecting data from groups of schools across the various weeks, beginning at the end of January and expanding into March. In April to May, we will be looking closely at the response rate across schools and following up with students and families who did not complete the census and who did not opt out. This is to ensure that we have given everyone the opportunity to participate. Preliminary data analysis will continue into August, with early reporting scheduled between September to December. Throughout the year, we will host additional sessions like this to provide you with feedback, but also for you to have an opportunity to provide input. A number of resources and supports have been developed and will be used to ensure students and parents and guardians feel at ease in completing the census. These include definitions for unfamiliar terms, translations in Arabic, French, Hindi, Punjabi, simplified Chinese, Spanish, and Urdu, modifications for students who are English language learners and or with special education needs, and read-along versions of the census for educators so that they know how to support students with each question of the census. Likewise, for parents and guardians, we would like for you to feel supported and that you have information accessible to you with ease. Student Census webpage will have a PDF version of the student census for your review. This will be posted right after the winter break when the consent process will begin. Frequently asked questions will also be posted or is actually already posted on the website and will be updated regularly. An email account has been set up and you can send the questions at studentcensus@hdsb.ca. And translations and support from youth settlement workers is also available. This presentation will also be posted on the website and translated. Last points for families to know and to keep in mind. The census is voluntary and confidential, so the privacy is paramount to us. The data gathered will only be accessible to a few number of individuals. The data do represent and must represent student perceptions, so do know that there are no right or wrong answers. Student responses may differ from parents and guardians and can also change over time. So it's okay for your children to have a different answer than what you might expect. And it's also okay for your child not to have an answer to a particular question and to choose that they don't know. That is an okay answer. I hope that you found this session informative and we look forward to receiving your questions as well. Please visit hdsb.ca Our homepage will guide you on how to access the Student Census page. You can search on the search function on the main page for Student Census, or you can use the link posted here to take you directly there. Thank you very much for listening.
Once again, that was Dr. Rosanna Vigelia, who is one of our research specialists for the Halton District School Board. And I can let you know that following the presentation that we will be translating her slide deck into various different languages, as you can see on the screen there: Arabic, Chinese, French, Hindi, Punjabi, Spanish, and Urdu. And these will be posted on our board website. At this point in the evening, actually, I think I'm going to turn to Rosanna to get us started with some of the questions that have come in over the past week. And to start with, wanted to kind of pick up on one of the points that was mentioned in your presentation, maybe reinforce it. So we actually have two different questions. Maybe we'll kind of combine them into one, Rosanna. One of the questions is, what does it mean that the census is voluntary? And I know you spoke to that, so maybe you can just elaborate, and maybe also speak to a question that's come in around how someone can opt out if they want to, if they don't want to participate in the census. Maybe in doing so, you can also highlight various different opt-out options. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening. So the student census is absolutely voluntary. So that what that means is that parents and guardians can opt their children out, and students themselves can also choose to answer or not answer particular questions that they might not want to provide an answer to. So in early January, families will receive an information letter through School Messenger. In that letter, there will be a link to an online form where you can submit your request to have your child opted out of the process. So we will collect just very basic information: your child's first name, last name, a student ID, their school and grade, and you have our assurance that your child will not receive the electronic invitation to complete the student census. So the opt-out process will be electronic. However, should you wish to have an alternate method, you can always email to studentcensus@hdsb.ca, or you can call either myself or the information line here at the board, and that information will be communicated to us. It is preferred to use the online method that will come to you through School Messenger.
Thanks, Rosanna. And I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I also believe that rather than opting out of the entire census, is that students will have the option, number one, of when they're coming across questions that they don't feel that they can answer, of either skipping that question or indicating that they don't know. Could you just clarify that?
Yes, absolutely. So all the questions are voluntary. So although the questionnaire is online, it's an electronic form, none of the questions are mandatory. So that means that a student can skip a question. Most of the questions also have a do not know or prefer not to answer option. So a student can provide a valid response, such as I'm not sure, or I prefer not to answer, or they can simply just leave the question blank and skip on to the next question.
Thanks for clarifying that. And just wanted to reinforce that our data will only be as valid as the participation rates allow for. So, and we know that other school boards, such as the Toronto District School Board, that has conducted several student censuses over the years, has had extremely high participation rates, well over 90%. So that's certainly our goal, and look to working with families to really ensure that they are comfortable with the census and really understand why it's so critical that we collect this information. And hopefully Dr. Jewel Moa and our director, Stuart Miller, was able to address that at the beginning of the presentation for you. At this point, I wanted to turn to our system principal of equity, Mary Marshall. We have a question here, Mary. It's what does the school board expect to gain knowing sexual identities and sexual orientation? And further to this, race or religion. Why does this information matter in a learning environment?
Thanks, Rob. Great question. As we heard Dr. Moa refer earlier to the makeup of identities and the intersections of all of the different aspects of an individual's identity play a really key role in how they experience the world, and therefore how we need to think about how we're responding and supporting those students as they're in our schools. So when we have a better understanding of our students, including those two particular aspects, sexual identity, sexual orientation, along with race and religion, it provides us with a better understanding of who they are. We also know that provincial identity data, as well as our own school climate data, suggests that the outcomes are disproportionate for some groups of students, particularly students who identify as 2S LGBTQ+, or two-spirited. And we know that disproportionate outcomes are also evident in data from across the province for Black, Indigenous, or racialized students, for students with disabilities or students with special education needs. And so collecting all of this particular data allows us to analyze it at a system level and look at how we can better serve and support all of our students, look at those disproportionate outcomes, systemic barriers that may be in place for those students, and respond by developing programs, revising programs, thinking about policy and classroom teaching practices that we know will benefit those students, not particular specific students, because our data isn't divided out in that way for us, but it helps us consider as a system how we need to adjust and respond. And as you heard Director Miller indicate earlier, how we can look at allocating resources to better improve school environments for all of our students when we think about the complexity of the identities that each of us is made up by.
Thanks so much for clarifying that, Mary. Yes, as Director Miller pointed out at the beginning, I mean, we know Halton students do exceptionally well on pretty much any standard that you want to measure them to across the province, and certainly not the least of which is actual academic achievement. But there are we know that those high levels of achievement are not necessarily experienced equally across various different identity groups within our board. And this information will be instrumental in helping us identify where those gaps are and how we can resource those gaps. So thanks for clarifying that. I'm going to go back to Rosanna now. I've got kind of two questions that are kind of related and interconnected. Can parents see the questions that will be asked on the census form in advance? And will the census be sent to parents in advance of being conducted? So they're both kind of asking the same thing. So your assistance there, please, Rosanna.
Yeah, sure. So absolutely, we want parents and guardians to provide an informed decision. And so the student census will be posted on the student census website around the same time that the school messenger email goes out. And so that parents can have some time to review the census and reach out if they have questions before deciding whether to allow their child to participate or not. We will not be emailing the student census itself, but in the information letter that will be emailed through school messenger, there will be a link to the website so that parents don't have to go hunt on our website to find the document.
Thanks, Rosanna. I'm now going to take us over to Jewel. Jewel, we have a question here with respect to gender identity. So why is it necessary to collect gender identity data for all students, but sexual orientation only for older students? This seems to have a bias attached that an individual can know their gender, but not their sexual orientation at a young age. Bit of a complex one, but I know you can help us understand that piece, Jewel.
Thanks very much, Rob. An interesting question indeed. So I think, as has been explained, the student census for students from kindergarten to grade 3 will be completed by their parents, and then students in grades 4 to 12 will complete the question for themselves. The question about sexual orientation is only applied to older students, as was also discussed in the first video that you shared, because really the issue of sexual orientation is something that develops post-adolescence or post-puberty, certainly. And so for younger students, although some students might have a sense of what their sexual orientation will develop to be, it's really not something that becomes established until much later. And as Mary had explained, I think the reason why we're seeking such a broad range of information on our different avenues of identities is because there could be learning gaps or certainly inclusion discrepancies according to particular aspects of identity. And certainly in the secondary school context, the issue of sexual orientation, certainly for members of the 2S LGBTQ community, unfortunately becomes an issue of marginalization or bullying for those students. And so where that issue occurs in secondary school will be really where we're trying to gather that information from. Also, I think to go back to the interesting point of the question you posed, Rob, is that there is a difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. So they are not the same. And we come to our understanding of those for ourselves at different points. And so that's also why we're asking the question at different points or different age groups. I hope that clarifies, but I'm happy to take a follow-up if you're looking for more information there.
Thanks, Jewel. And we may circle back to you in a minute because I think we just got a question that's somewhat connected. So I may get back to you in a minute, but I'm going to ask Rosanna to join us again. This question was actually one that we talked about as a steering committee. As was mentioned in the presentation, we've had a work group that's been planning for implementation of the student census for about 2 years now. So lots to consider in how to ensure privacy and confidentiality, as well as just sheer efficiency of reaching our students and reaching our families. So this question is related to, I guess, the complexity of some of the concepts in the student census. So some of the concepts in the student census are complicated even for adults. And Jewel kind of touched upon one of them just now. So for the sake of a quality census, have students been provided opportunities to develop an understanding of related areas and concepts? What has been done by the school board to make sure students have a good grasp of these concepts before they answer the questions? For example, what is the difference or relationship between gender identity and sexual orientation? We just heard from Jewel on that particular concept. Or for religion, is it purely rooted for family and race versus a form of self-consciousness? So that's a long one, but I turn over to you, Rosanna, to help us with the complexity of some of the ideas within the census and the questions therein.
Sure, thank you. So the identity-based questions come to us from the Anti-Racism Directorate and the Ministry of Education. So those two bodies have actually consulted with a number of school boards, and in part of that consultation was to develop preambles to each question, so introductions to these questions, and as well as terminology for terms that we know can be unfamiliar to students. And so educators will be provided with a manual, if you will, an administration manual that will have every single question, the introduction or the preamble that will be read aloud to students, and each term defined so that every student is receiving the same information. As well, this is not meant to be an activity whereby we're testing students' knowledge. It's really about gathering students' perceptions at that given time. So it's completely okay for a student to not know their religious affiliation. Having said that, educators are encouraged to introduce terms that they might not have discussed prior to the census. As a committee, we are doing our best to ensure that the administration aligns closely with the ministry curriculum, and so that we're not introducing concepts like gender identity or sexual orientation to students that have not come across those terms and have had the opportunity to discuss and ask questions. So a lot of thought has gone into the planning. We received a direction from the Ministry of Education as to how the administration needs to look like, so that across boards there are similarities in the administration. And those decisions were based on consultations with other school boards. And as I mentioned, there's a number of resources for educators to use. And we've ensured to have an unsure option in the question so that if a student really does not know, they can have an option that aligns with their feelings at that particular time.
Thanks so much, Rosanna. I'm going to ask Mary Marshall to join us again. A question has come in, not directly related to a student census, but in fact is asking about a staff census and whether there are any plans for the HDSB to conduct something similar for staff.
Thanks, Rob. And of course, that's a natural extension when we think about gathering census data for our students. There are plans, yes, in development to conduct a staff census of the HDSB employee group. As with the collection of the student data, all staff data will be collected on a voluntary basis and in accordance with any laws governing privacy and confidentiality. So the same processes would be in place. And that analysis of the identity-based data for our staff, coupled with looking at the organization itself, will help us identify a number of systemic barriers, as well as the makeup of our employees across a whole host of different roles within the organization. It's also going to inform and help us adjust and refine our recruitment practices, thinking about hiring, promotion, as well as professional development strategies within our board. So in the same way that we'll be using our student identity-based data to inform and adjust plans, so too will our staff census data be able to inform and help us make improvements across the system.
Thanks so much, Mary. I think I'm going to jump in here on this question that's come in, and it really speaks more to a staff piece more than a student piece. But the question is, what efforts are being done by the HDSB to recruit Muslim teachers? It is quite critical as part of inclusion and acceptance and tolerance efforts to have certified teachers who reflect the student populations, and we couldn't agree with you more. Whoever sent that question in, and one reason why we are wanting to conduct a staff census ourselves is really to look at that particular piece. We know, for example, that it is critical for students to be reflected in their learning environments, in the resources that are being used in the classrooms, as well as the people that are in their buildings. We know that to be very important, that there is strength in diversity. And we know schools that are lucky enough to have very diverse staffs go very far in really addressing the needs of their populations very effectively. So that type of information is going to be really critical as we set goals as a school board, and really look to finding where those gaps are and trying to fill those gaps. And I know this question was about teachers who identify as Muslim, but we could say the exact same thing for some other traditionally underrepresented groups in our teaching staffs and in our board in all different roles. For example, teachers who identify as Black, or teachers who may identify as to LGBTQ. So that's for the same reason that we're going to be conducting the student census is exactly the same reason why we're very keen on taking this out to staff as well. So thank you for that question. Okay, I'm going to work back up to Rosanna again, and we had a question here about just the ability of teachers being able to explain and or reframe the questions for younger grades. We know that students across our entire system, across all the grades, will be participating in the student census. So knowing that some of these students will be younger, what opportunity is there for teachers to assist with supporting our students in general, so that they don't get mixed up between some of the concepts that are presented in the census?
Okay, thank you. So school boards administer similar surveys like this every year as part of initiatives to measure school climate. So this is not a novel exercise for educators by any means. Having said that, this is a little different, obviously, because we are gathering even more sensitive information. And so the questions will have the preamble that has been provided to us from the Ministry of Education and the Anti-Racism Directorate. The terms have been defined, and educators will also have an opportunity to have access to the student census well in advance. There's instructional program leaders who are part of the work group for the student census in developing. They've been involved in developing the resources and the implementation plan. And administrators have also had the opportunity to learn about the student census, and they'll also be provided with resources to share with their staff members. So certainly there's lots of information that has and will be shared with educators, but still it's important to note that this is meant to be a student perception, and it's absolutely okay for a student to not know. That's information in and of itself. And so we need to be cautious that we're not guiding or leading students to particular answers. And that is why we have a standard set of ways of introducing the question and of defining the terms, so that students really are providing a response that is valid of how they see themselves and how they feel in a context within HDSB.
Thanks, Rosanna. Jewel, I was wondering if you could join us and help us address another question that's come in. The question is, what do you mean by sexual orientation for a JK to a grade 2 student? So for early learners. And again, just to reinforce that this census will be shared out with all of our students, right from junior kindergarten all the way up to grade 12 students. So with our very young students, what do we mean by sexual orientation?
I think, thanks very much, Rob, for that question. I think similar to what I mentioned earlier, so sexual orientation is not something that we would expect very young students to answer. That wouldn't be the response. It's really something we're looking for from older students, given that sexual orientation might not be something that very young students have come to understand or appreciate in themselves yet. So that could be one where if the question appears in the question set for young students, it could be, don't know or does not apply in that instance. But certainly Rosanna spoke to, I think, the validity of questions, and the validity of a response to that would certainly be more relevant with an older student than with the younger students. And I see Rosanna has come on to probably elaborate upon my response in a more technical research specific way.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jewel. Yeah, sexual orientation will not be asked, not even of the parent and guardians for the K-3. And in fact, not even gender identity will be on the K-3 version. Those concepts, as Jewel has mentioned, really are to align the content of the census with the ministry curriculum. Those concepts are introduced later on to students. And so the census aligns with those timelines. So it's actually not until grade 6 or grade 7 that those questions will appear.
Thank you so much for the clarification. And just again, to reinforce to parents that for kindergarten to grade 3 students, parents will be filling it out on behalf of the students, and hopefully with the students themselves, and really just in more of a support role. And students in grades 4 through 12 will be doing that independently on their own. We've had a question just arrive in during our presentation, and the question is, and I'll get Rosanna to speak to this one. Will the data show special education identification, suspensions, behavior interventions, such as VITRAs, broken down by race, gender, etc.? And so I think, well, I'll let you address the question.
Yes, so absolutely. That is the long-term plan of gathering this type of information, is for us to look at patterns of representation across all areas, disaggregated by identity variables, whether that's race, ethnicity, language, immigration status, ability level, gender identity, and so forth. So because the census is not anonymous, it is linked to a student ID, we will be able to link student responses to their academic record. Now that's done behind the scenes, and that's done strictly by just a few people in the board, so myself and members of the research of the IT department. And so only a very small number of individuals would actually have access to those data files. But it is a requirement that comes to us from the Anti-Racism Directorate. And in fact, if one were to look at the data standards, one would see that public sector organizations have to report what is referred to as disproportionality indices. So there are formulas that are provided in the data standards. And as a system, we need to look at areas of disproportionate representation. So whether that's in spec ed status, behavioral intervention type of programs, gifted programs, and so forth. So that is the long-term ways in which the data will be analyzed and looked at systemically. At no point will schools, teachers, principals receive individual student records whereby a child's identity is revealed. So this information, again, will sit in the back end within the research department, protected by IT. And so the reports that schools will receive are at high level, so group level information that describes the kinds of patterns that we're seeing. So it could be in your behavioral program classrooms, this is the race composition in your school, or in your gifted program, this is the composition of boys, girls, and other genders. So it would be at that level, and that is to protect the individual privacy and identity of the students.
Thank you so much. We're going to take, I'm just looking at the hour, so we're going to take two final questions. Sorry, I think they're both coming to you, Rosanna, if you don't mind.
Yep.
One speaks to, how and where will the census be delivered during class time, or will it be available online? So how do we plan to operationalize this, especially during in the middle of a pandemic? Where we have a number of students not attending in-person schooling, but are attending virtually at the moment. So I'll turn that over to you.
So as a committee, we've had lots of conversations about this. So for grade 4 to grade 12, the student census will be administered in a way that can be facilitated by an educator. So for students who are in class, then it would be during in-class time. And typically it takes about one period of time. If for students who are attending virtually, there will be some flexibility on how educators will schedule the student census, and we're leaving that to the professional judgment of educators, knowing that there's some time to administer the census, so it doesn't have to take, or it doesn't have to be completed all in one day. This is something that an educator can span through a course of a week and a half, or even 2 weeks. And so that they're able to really support students, even in a remote and virtual format. For the K-3, it will be received directly by parents and guardians. So it is up to them to decide how to complete it and when to complete it. We will provide a general window of time, but the administration would really not differ whether we are in a pandemic or not a pandemic for the K-3 population. I also would like to mention that students are able to save their responses and go back to it at a later time. So if a student is finding that, after 10 minutes, they're feeling tired and they need a break, and they would rather go back to it the next day, or for students who are in the virtual environment, if there is a glitch with technology or the Wi-Fi, they're able to access the census again the next day or at a later time, and their responses would have been saved in real time. So we are using the survey platform Qualtrics, which is one of the most reputable survey platforms for this kind of work. They've actually engaged with other school boards in gathering this type of data. And it was the chosen platform based on a privacy assessment that was done in-house. And in fact, we had looked at a number of other tools, and this particular tool came out as the best in terms of privacy protection and stability of the platform.
Thanks, Rosanna. I think you actually just segued nicely and really partially answered my next question and final question, which speaks to the absolute critical nature and sensitivity of the information that's been collected. And I can speak on behalf of yourself and the board that that we have researched this extensively in terms of the platform to use, and arrived exactly on the Qualtrics as the best platform to use for this work. And a really big reason for that has to speak to and reinforce how seriously we take privacy and the confidentiality and the confidentiality of the information that is being collected. So really the final question, if you have anything further to add around privacy and how will you ensure that the census information never gets presented, that specific information about a particular child's identity or responses, how will we ensure that that is not shared beyond the platform and beyond the research department?
Sure. So privacy, we embedded privacy considerations throughout all of our planning. So from the beginning, from the time that a student receives their invitation to complete the census and they click on the URL is specific to that particular student. So in the back end of Qualtrics, it is tied to the student first name and last name and student ID, grade, and school. But that information does not appear anywhere on the actual screen that the student sees. So should a student, for example, as they're completing the census, they leave the screen on, there is no name or identifying information that would appear. The information, once submitted, it's stored on the Qualtrics servers, and even within the Qualtrics, which are actually located in Canada, and that was one of the considerations in our privacy impact assessment, that the information be stored on Canadian servers and obviously subjected to the privacy laws in Canada. But even within the Qualtrics team, there's only a handful of individuals that actually even have access to those servers, and they cannot access the data files of HDSB without our consent. So that information is encrypted and locked and only accessible to myself. I'm the only person, in addition to one other member in the IT department, that can actually log in and see the information that has been submitted. Once the information comes in, it will be de-identified, so that as we're doing our analyses and creating the reports, those analyses and reports are actually being done on anonymized data files. So it'll be data files that will say student number, AB234, and that AB234 will be linked in a separate sheet that, again, will only be accessible to myself and one or two other individuals in the IT department. So we really put privacy at the forefront here to ensure that we're gathering information that is valid and that students and parents feel safe in providing, because it is important information. The school board will use it in their board improvement plans. Schools will use it to set goals for their school improvement plans. And truthfully, even students, we get requests from Student Senate and student councils. Students themselves are curious about this type of information and further understanding their peers. So we know that it's important information, but we also know that it's sensitive and we need to protect it, to protect the confidentiality of all students.
Thank you, Rosanna, for that answer, and thanks for all your answers this evening, as well as your presentation, and for that matter, for all the work that you've done in getting us ready for the HDSB student census. At this point in the evening, we would like to bring things to a close, and I would like to thank all the members of the panel for helping share their various different perspectives, and hopefully helping you, the audience, really better understand why this is a particularly important initiative for the Halton District School Board and for all school boards for that matter. and the very comprehensive way and very strategic way that we have gone about approaching this really important task. And we've done so with, I can assure you, with absolute great care. Having said that, we know you may walk away from this evening having further questions, wanting to get further information, and that's completely reasonable. And I would just direct you to www.hdsb.ca and search up Student Census, and that will take you to a page that will provide you with lots of information, not the least of which will be some frequently asked questions that will hopefully answer some of your questions. A full recording of the information session from this evening will be posted on the HDSB website. Closed captioning will be available as part of the recorded copy after this live stream. I would say if you have any questions at all about the student census, please reference the board website, and please use and ask any questions that you may have at your schools. Staff are there to help and support and really ensure that you have a full and comprehensive understanding of what your students, what your children will be engaging with over the next couple of months. So thank you again. Wishing you all the best. Take care.